How's it going, folks? Jack Miller here, incredibly underqualified punk historian, and today I am here to share some of my thoughts on the recently announced NOFX breakup. Now, just in case you're not up to speed yet, let's get all on the same page. I'll read a little bit of this article here. NOFX, the Los Angeles skate punk band, currently made up of Michael Fat Mike Burkett, Eric Melvin, Eric Smelly Sandin, and Aaron El Jefe Abeda, are officially breaking up in 2023. Burkett indirectly announced the news on Instagram, where he replied to a fan asking why NOFX don't tour Canada very often. Actually, we love Canada, it's just that next year will be our last year, he wrote. We will be announcing our final show soon. It's been an amazing run. I don't know if you guys have also seen, they've announced they're going to be doing their final album as well. They're calling it Double Album, and it looks like it's going to be out in December. I don't know if it has any connection to the previously released single album that came out not too long ago, but they did drop a single the other day called Darby Crashing Your Party. I listened to it a few times, and I have to say I thought it was pretty solid. And it's got a little punch of the older NOFX sound that we haven't really heard from them in a little while now. So I have a good feeling about the album. As for the actual breakup, however, something I want to address right off the bat is that there's been a lot of speculation this might be fake news, some of the classic NOFX fuckery we've come to know and love over the years. And while stranger things most certainly have happened, especially in the case of NOFX, I believe this to be a little bit of wishful thinking. Obviously, as fans, none of us want to see the end of NOFX. They've been such a staple of punk rock for the better half of their near 40-year run now. In fact, by the time they do split up next year, it will have been possibly even more than 40 years of NOFX, and they've always had new shit going on throughout their run, either a new album every few years, constantly on tour, the various documentary pieces they've put out, everything to do with Fat Wreck, and more recently the Punk and Drublic festivals. But something that we need to understand is, alongside this very rigorous schedule they've had, they have a reputation of doing a lot of excessive partying. And while I'm sure some of us have experience with touring, recording, and partying on top of that, maybe not to the extent that NOFX do, but enough to understand the tolls those can take on an individual and a group of individuals and their relationships with each other, especially as they get older. And NOFX are not in their 20s anymore, they're in their 50s now, and on top of that, they all have their families and their lives at home. And in circumstances where someone has made, or a group of people have made, this passion their career or their entire lifestyle, there can be situations where they feel they have missed out on other parts of their life. And I know that they have reflected on that a little bit over the years. Most notably, at least in my mind, is the one bit in Backstage Passport where Fat Mike was particularly upset about missing his daughter's birthday, and I'm sure that's not the only thing of that nature that has affected them and their decision as of late. In addition to where they're at in life these days, we also have to address that they have most certainly made their mark on punk, on music, on really alternative culture as a whole at this point. They have a hell of a legacy, like I said, 40 years of NOFX, and they have pretty much been on top of the scene, I would say, since around the time S&M Airlines came out. And in addition to that, they've done it all themselves. I know a lot of their peers, like Rancid or Bad Religion, or even Green Day, I guess could have been considered a peer to NOFX, at least at some point, had major label connections of some way or another, and that was able to help them branch out and reach further audiences. And NOFX instead chose to do it all themselves. They chose to go the DIY route, and while that may have been a little bit of a risky decision for them at the time when they begun doing that, they took off from Epitaph and decided to just roll with their own label that they had started a few years prior. It has most certainly worked out for them in the utmost of favorable ways. That label is one of the staple labels of punk at this point. It sits in the same league as SST and Alternative Tentacles and obviously Epitaph, and not to mention Fat Records have also put out tons of phenomenal bands over the years like Propagandhi and Frenzal Rhomb, Strung Out, the Bomb Pops, that have all certainly maybe not risen to the same stature of NOFX, but have all certainly made their marks on punk music. And it really just goes to show that the legacy of Fat Wreck alone just really goes to show how important a piece of the punk rock pie that NOFX is. And all of that being in place, they are very much in a position to sort of go out with a bang and leave on good terms, if you will. And additionally, on that note of going out with a bang, something that we actually haven't seen from NOFX that we might see from other bands that have been around for a similar incredibly long-lasting career and keep releasing new material is we have not seen them sort of do that dive and just fall off into irrelevancy, at least with their newer material. Of course, a lot of people have been very critical of some of their newer material, I would say from the past 5 to 7 years, only because it's being held to the standard of some of their other releases like Punk and Drublic or So Long and Thanks for All the Shoes, or even some of the more recent releases like, for instance, War on Errorism or Coaster, or even Self-Entitled, that were still very, very strong releases in their own right. And the fact of the matter is that no band, no matter who they are, can stay in their prime forever. And the fact that NOFX has lasted as long as it did is truthfully just mind-blowing. I suppose I can speak on that as someone who got into NOFX further down the line of their everlasting prime. I first heard them when I was about 13 years old. I believe it was the year 2010 when I first got into NOFX. Obviously, Coaster was around, and Punk and Drublic was, of course, still in heavy rotation. Those were the first two albums I heard from them, and everything else in the back catalog followed shortly after. And I still can't not explain how much their sound overall just blew my mind the first time I heard them. It completely reinvented how I thought about music, the type of band I wanted to be in, the kind of music I wanted to write, the type of scene I wanted to be a part of. It just really reinvented my perspective of music, and I know a lot of us have had that similar experience with them, whether we discovered them in the 90s, whether it was before or after their break with Punk and Drublic, or later on down the line towards the 2000s and 2010s, and that's certainly not to say that isn't still happening these days. I would just be one to say that their best records might be behind them at this point in their career, and I think to an extent they might also be aware of that, and walking away from it right now would still leave them in that position of a band that never really released anything everyone hated. And on the topic of this legacy that this incredibly long-lasting career and mind-blowingly long-lasting prime, not to mention the intergenerational fan base they've garnered over the years, has really created for them, the end of their career does not mean the end of that legacy. A lot of older bands and musical artists that have similar stories to NOFX, not even necessarily punk rock bands, but just music artists overall, will have legacies like this that outlive their careers and oftentimes outlive the musicians themselves. The most obvious example of this is the Ramones and the Sex Pistols in punk rock, at least. And clearly those bands still have legacies that are gaining them new fans to this day. So their legacy is certainly not going anywhere. There will always be a place for NOFX and their music and everything they did for punk in punk rock culture and music. But even though I believe that this is probably going to be the end for NOFX in 2023, I'm not saying let's rule out the possibility that they might be fucking with us. They might just be being the old fuckers that we've come to know and love over the years. And in fact, as a NOFX fan, a part of me certainly hopes that I am wrong about this. Another possibility is that we might get a NOFX reunion at some point if they do end up breaking up. And but something I definitely don't see them doing, if that is to happen, is like sort of a reunion like the Dead Kennedys did. If, say, somebody didn't want to come back to NOFX, like maybe it was El Jefe or Eric Melvin didn't want to come back to NOFX, I don't see them touring without anyone who's in the band now, because it's been the same four dudes for over 30 years at this point, while a lot of these older bands like DK or Black Flag that have gotten together, they really only had runs that lasted around a decade. And so if we're gonna get a NOFX reunion, if they do split up and we do get a reunion, it will definitely be the same crew. But like I keep saying, as of right now, I am under the impression that this is probably going to be the end of NOFX's career. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching. Be sure to let me know what you think about the NOFX breakup situation. Also, let me know what you think of this type of more free-form discussion video. I would certainly be interested in doing more content like this in the future if it's something y'all would be interested in watching. I do apologize if it is a little bit shaky. To an extent, I am still getting used to this whole talking on camera thing, and this is obviously the first time I've done something like this. I do have a proper video planned for October that I think you guys will all probably be into, and I'm going to be doing a poll as well for future videos after that, so keep an eye out for that as well. I'd love to get your feedback on what bands, labels, subgenres you'd like to hear me talk about in the future. I'd also be thrilled to do a proper history rundown on NOFX. That'll probably happen next year as we get closer to the official breakup date of them. But anyways, if you're feeling kind, please leave a subscribe. That always helps. Really appreciate all of that and the views. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.